You are now listening to Black Coffee, Crime, and Crochet, a true crime podcast where cozy meets criminal, hosted by Jasmine C.L. Prince. Grab your yarn, pour up an iced coffee, let's sit through the chaos.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Black Coffee, Crime, and Crochet. I am your host, Jasmine C.L. Prince. This is a space where we slow down to catch every stitch. We never let the facts get cold. We unpack crime, scams, and cultural chaos while sipping iced coffee and keeping our hands busy. Each episode, we slow things down, tell the full story, and talk about what really happens when trust gets weaponized. Before we get into today's series, we are 2 weeks behind. My apologies. 2 weeks ago was finals week. It was really hectic. I had 2 classes. I had a final exam and a group final project. So that monopolized all of my time. Didn't get an episode out 2 weeks ago. Then last week, I'm going to be honest, I was in my head because I kept getting the reviews about me overusing filler words, and I internalized it and overthought it, and I psyched myself out. So I wasn't in the space to get an episode out because I was really focusing on that, and I allowed it to just get me off my game. So I didn't record. But we are back for this week. I apologize for just disappearing for 2 weeks and not saying anything. I'm going to be better about that with posting. So if you all aren't following me on social media, please do that because I will start posting if I'm not going to release an episode. So now that that's all out of the way, today's episode is a part of the December series, Sports Scams and Frauds, where we're looking at what happens after the game ends and the money starts moving. This week's episode is called The Parental Hustle, because sometimes the most dangerous scammers don't always show up as strangers. Sometimes they show up as, and I'm doing quotes here, family. Picture this. You are 22 years old, fresh out of college, and your whole life just changed. You signed your first professional contract. You are hearing numbers you have never heard before. Millions, bonuses, sponsorship potential. Everybody you grew up with is suddenly calling. Reporters want quotes. Your family wants to celebrate. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, somebody steps in and says the words every overwhelmed young athlete wants to hear. I got you. You do not need to worry. Let me handle it. Just focus on the game. Call me mom. Call me pops. That's how it starts. Not with a contract or a pitch deck or a detailed investment plan. It starts with comfort, with protection, with belonging. It starts with somebody presenting themselves as a safe place, the mentor, the spiritual guide, the one who understands you, your background, your pressure, your dreams. But what happens when the person calling you son or baby is running the most calculated play of your entire career? What happens when your trusted advisor is not watching your blind side, but lining it up to hit you? This week on Black Coffee, Crime, and Crochet, we are stepping into a story where the hustle was not just financial, it was emotional. 2 predators working in 2 different corners of the sports world using the same psychological playbook. William Tank Black, the agent who positioned himself as pops to dozens of young Black athletes, and Peggy Fulford, the self-proclaimed financial momager who promised to handle everything while quietly draining bank accounts dry. This one is more than fraud. This is the manipulation of quote-unquote family. This is the parental hustle. So, like always, before we get into it, we're going to do our iced coffee of the week. So, today's blend is the Mocha Hustle Cold Brew. It is strong, smooth, and deceptively sweet. So, here's how to make it. 1 cup cold brew coffee, a half cup a half cup oat milk. You can use chocolate if you want or regular. 1 tablespoon caramel syrup, 1 teaspoon vanilla syrup, and then ice. So if you know how we assemble drinks here, we do the coffee, then the milk, then the syrup, then the ice. Ice goes last. Just trust me. It's bold, it's indulgent, and it'll keep you sharp while we talk about players who fumbled their integrity, not just the ball. And when I talk about players, I don't mean the actual players because they didn't do anything wrong. Okay, crochet project update. Still working through my husband's sweater. I'm kind of switching to freehanding it. I have an idea in my head about what I want to do. So I'm working my way through that now. I got the front of it done. I'm working on the back panel and I want to add some texture to it. So I'm about halfway down the back panel and I'm trying to see what stitch I want to switch to give texture to the bottom half. So we'll see how that ends up. And then just the sleeves, which will be just a basic, I'm pretty sure, double crochet in a rectangle and then sew it up the side. So we're getting there. But that is the crochet update. So without further ado, let's start with the first quote unquote parental figure in the story, William H. Tank Black. On paper, he is one of the biggest cautionary tales in sports when it comes to what happens when your quote father figure and your financial gatekeeper are the same person. Between 1996 and 2000, Tank Black went from being a respected, registered NFL and NBA agent to the center of a multi-layer fraud operation that targeted his own clients. Federal regulators and prosecutors eventually said he and his inner circle defrauded roughly 24 pro athletes out of millions of dollars. Some estimates put the total losses as high as $13.5 million. The way he did it was not just one scam. It was a whole ecosystem. There were three main parts: getting players into a massive offshore Ponzi scheme, later tied to cash for titles; a stock hustle where he took free shares in a company called BAOA Inc., then secretly sold those shares to his own clients; and a diversion and commingling scheme where client money was quietly funneled through companies he controlled, including Silverline Development Corporation, LLC, and accounts in the Cayman Islands. Regulators came at him hard. The SEC filed a civil case. The Department of Justice brought criminal charges in more than one state. And at the end of it all, Black was convicted of fraud conspiracy in Florida and money laundering and obstruction of justice in Michigan. Put together, it added up to a maximum sentence of 82 months in federal prison and a $12 million restitution order. So when we talk about the parental hustle, this is the first example. The mentor who called himself family then weaponized that trust inside a high-stakes financial environment. But let's go back a bit because Tank did not start off as a random outsider. He worked his way into these athletes' lives slowly and strategically. So let's get into who he is. William Tank Black was born March 11, 1957 in Johnson City, Tennessee to William H. Black Sr. and Thelma Brown. He got the nickname Tank from his dad because he weighed 11 pounds at birth. He went on to play college football from 1975 to 1978 for Carson Newman. And his poor mother, I cannot imagine first carrying a baby that weighed 11 pounds, but then giving birth to a baby that weighed 11 pounds. My girls were both 6, and he was double that. I bless her heart. Goodness. But Tank didn't start out in a suit. He started on the sidelines. He was a college football coach at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga in 1980, and by 1983, he was the wide receivers coach and top recruiter for the University of South Carolina. This is crucial, y'all. That recording role is where the long game started. As a recruiter, he was the first person these young men and their mothers met. He was the one sitting in their living rooms promising to protect their sons. He was building relationships with young athletes long before they ever needed an agent. He was the guy on the sidelines, the mentor, the one helping them navigate college ball. By the time he founded Professional Management Incorporated in 1988, he had already weaponized that trust. He was more than an agent. He was Pops, a second father who had known these kids since they were teenagers. In 1988, he flipped that relational capital into a business. He founded Professional Management Incorporated, or PMI, in Columbia, South Carolina. The company represented NFL and NBA players and handled contract negotiations. By 1999, he was at his peak. That year's NFL draft, he signed a record number of first-round picks for a single agent. That run of success made him look like a star in the industry, the kind of agent every prospect wanted. It also made the illusion of reliability even stronger. The real glue here was the personal bond. Players like Fred Taylor talked about calling him Pops or like a second dad. They described the relationship as unconditional trust. That emotional bond became the opening for the financial abuse that came later. Because for a lot of pro athletes, money hits fast, but the business training does not. It is already hard to know who to trust when it comes to investments, contracts, and long-term planning. So when the person guiding you is not just your agent, but also a father figure, it becomes almost impossible to ask hard questions or demand outside reviews. Tank moved from recruiter to mentor to financial agent, and that slow evolution made his influence feel normal. What he really did was turn that emotional dependency into a tool. Instead of competing like a normal financial professional, he bypassed scrutiny by leaning on loyalty. So here is how Tank built the corporate machine around the scam. The fraud did not happen in a vacuum. Tank built a whole corporate structure around himself so everything looked legit. PMI was the main sports agency. That was the face of the business, handling contracts for NFL and NBA players. As the money got more complicated and the scams got more sophisticated, Tank brought in a key player in September 1997. He hired a Columbia, South Carolina lawyer named James A. Franklin Jr. as general counsel. Franklin had both a law degree and an MBA, which gave the whole operation a layer of professional polish. Franklin was not just some outside lawyer. He became co-owner with Black of another company, Professional Management and Consulting Inc., or PMC, which supposedly offered legal and business consulting services. And then there was Silverline Development Corporation, LLC. The SEC later named Silverline as a relief defendant. That is a legal term that basically means the company benefited from the fraud even if it was not charged the same way. Silverline was controlled by Black and Franklin, which received money that came from their clients' investments. So you have PMI as the agent, PMC as the consulting arm, and Silverline as a place where money could be redirected and misused. Add in the fact that Franklin was a lawyer with an MBA, and it is clear this was not just someone pocketing cash in a simple way. It was a structured, layered enterprise. The setup helped them navigate and exploit regulatory gaps. It also made it harder to see what was really happening with client money. Those different entities gave them separation, deniability, and a way to hide the flow of funds, especially once offshore accounts came into play. So let's break down the three main schemes. According to the SEC, from 1996 to 2000, Black and Franklin ran three separate but connected schemes, pulling at least $5 million in ill-gotten gains for themselves out of client funds. So the first scheme, the offshore Ponzi play. The biggest piece was a classic Ponzi setup dressed up as a high-yield investment. Black and Franklin got their clients to put millions into what was described as a car title loan business. It was pitched as a program that would make money by giving high-interest loans using car titles as collateral. In reality, this money went into a massive Ponzi scheme later identified as part of the cash for titles fraud. Instead of real returns from a functioning business, money from new investors was used to pay earlier ones. It fits the exact definition of a Ponzi scheme where fake profits are just recycled deposits. On top of that, Tank and Franklin did not do real due diligence. There was no serious check into whether the car title program was actually safe or even legitimate. They were not protecting their clients. They were chasing quick money for themselves. The SEC later said they, quote, reaped undisclosed commissions almost equal to the returns received by the clients, end quote. In other words, if a client was told they made a certain amount, Tank and Franklin were taking a cut that was almost as big quietly on the side. That meant they got immediate liquidity for themselves, even if the underlying Ponzi was collapsing. Their payday did not depend on the investment working long term. It only depended on getting clients in the door. From a regulatory perspective, that is why the SEC also said Black was acting as an unregistered broker-dealer. He was placing clients into investment products, taking transaction-based compensation, and he was not legally registered to act in that role. So then we have Scheme 2, the BAOA Inc. stock hustle. The second scheme was a different type of theft built around a small public company called BAOA Inc. Black got free stock in BAOA by telling the company that his high-profile athlete clients would promote them. Those shares were issued in the clients' names with the understanding that the company was basically trading stock for access and visibility. Instead of passing that benefit along, Black turned around and sold those same shares to the clients as if he were offering them a legitimate investment opportunity. So the players essentially paid for stock that on paper had been issued to them for free. And Tank then kept the proceeds. Real sneaky. This was a clean example of self-dealing. He leveraged his clients' celebrity status to get something for nothing, then cashed in by selling the thing back to them and pocketing the money. And that doesn't happen by accident. It shows intent and planning, especially when you consider that this was separate from the Ponzi scheme. One scam depended on a third-party fraud like cash for titles. This stock scheme was entirely internal to Black's operation. Then the third scheme was the Cayman Islands diversion and commingling. This third scheme focused on what happened after the money came in. Black and Franklin secretly controlled entities based in the Cayman Islands. They used those offshore accounts to intercept and divert both principal and interest payments that were supposed to go to the clients. At the same time, they were using the access they had to client checking accounts. Many athletes had given PMI authority to pay their bills from those accounts. Instead of keeping each client's money separate and clean, however, the defendants mixed client funds together and blended them with their own money. So you have two layers of shade here. First, offshore structures in the Cayman Islands that are famous for secrecy. And second, deliberate commingling of funds in domestic accounts so that ownership becomes hard to untangle. That combination made it extremely difficult for regulators and forensic accountants to trace what money was truly lost to investment failure versus what was outright stolen. The SEC had to go to court to get an order forcing them to give a full accounting and reparate any offshore assets, specifically including Cayman Islands accounts. Once you hit that level of deliberate concealment, it is not just bad bookkeeping. It is a strategy to block asset recovery. So here is how regulators and prosecutors responded. The SEC filed a civil case. On February 24th, 2000, the SEC filed a civil enforcement action in the Middle District of Florida against Black, Franklin, PMI, PMC, and Silverline. They charged violations of several federal securities laws, including the key anti-fraud provisions, Section 17A of the Securities Act of 1933, Sections 10B and 15C of the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, and Rule 10b-5 under that act. They also charged them as unregistered investment advisors and unregistered broker-dealers, citing Section 15A of the Exchange Act and Sections 206(1) and 206(2) of the Investment Advisors Act of 1940. The core of the SEC's position was that Black and Franklin were acting like professional advisors and brokers, taking fees and commissions, including undisclosed commissions and transaction-based compensation, while exploiting their clients' trust. The SEC moved fast enough to get a temporary restraining order from the court. That order froze the assets of Black, Franklin, PMI, PMC, and Silverline, stopping them from accessing client accounts, and ordered them to provide an accounting and bring back any offshore assets. So from the civil side, the focus was stop the bleeding, lock down remaining funds, and push for disgorgement and accountability. Then we have criminal cases in Florida and Michigan. On the criminal side, the Department of Justice took a two-track approach in different jurisdictions. In the Northern District of Florida, a jury convicted Black on January 31st, 2002 of conspiring to commit mail fraud, wire fraud, and to obstruct the SEC investigation that was running in parallel. At the same time, in Detroit, Michigan, he was indicted on money laundering and drug-related charges tied to the cash for titles investment. He eventually pleaded guilty to money laundering and obstruction of justice in that case. Florida handled the fraud against the athletes directly, focusing on the conspiracy and the lies. Michigan focused on how the money moved, especially the laundering of proceeds from the larger Ponzi scheme. This split strategy meant the government could fully address both the fraud itself and the financial cleanup operation that followed. It also reinforced how serious they viewed his role inside cash for titles. So with the sentencing and restitution, after the dust settled in both criminal cases, Black's sentences were structured to run concurrently. In Florida, he received 60 months in prison for the fraud conspiracy. In Michigan, he received a longer sentence of 82 months for money laundering and obstruction of justice. That became his controlling term. He started serving the Detroit sentence in June 2001 and released from federal custody in December 2007. He was also ordered to pay $12 million in restitution to his victims. His co-conspirator, James A. Franklin Jr., was sentenced in July 2002. He received 54 months in prison and was ordered to pay the same $12 million in restitution, likely on a joint and several basis, meaning both men were responsible for the full amount. Franklin's sentence was lighter than what the guidelines suggested because he provided substantial cooperation to federal prosecutors and the SEC. That cooperation was enough for the court to give him a downward departure. Here is the basic breakdown of judicial outcomes and penalties. So again, William Tank Black, his convictions were conspiracy to commit wire and mail fraud in Florida, plus the money laundering and obstruction of justice in Michigan. His total prison time was 82 months. His restitution was $12 million. And for a legal note, in 2004, while in prison and representing himself, he partially appealed and won some SEC civil findings. Then James A. Franklin Jr., his conviction was conspiracy to commit wire fraud and to obstruct the SEC investigation. His total prison time was 54 months. Restitution was $12 million, joint and several. And then the legal note for him was sentence was reduced because of his substantial cooperation. But we have an appeal twist. While he was still incarcerated, Black represented himself in a 2004 appeal connected to the SEC civil case. This is what I was mentioning just a little bit ago. He managed to win a partial victory that cleared him of some specific allegations related to cheating clients in that particular civil matter. That does not erase his criminal convictions for conspiracy and money laundering. Those still stand. What it does show, however, is how different the standards and technical requirements are between civil and criminal law. The SEC case was more focused on the precise classification of the securities and transactions, like how the BAOA stock deals were structured and how the investment vehicles were labeled for regulatory purposes. Black appears to have found some kind of procedural or evidentiary weakness in that civil record. So in that narrow context, he got a partial reversal. But the criminal courts had already found beyond a reasonable doubt that he was part of a fraud and money laundering conspiracy. Those findings did not disappear. From the victim perspective, this type of technical civil win can complicate efforts at full disgorgement, even if the civil restitution orders remain in place. So what this did to the players, the financial impact was huge, but the emotional damage might have been even worse. Take Jacksonville Jaguars running back Fred Taylor. He lost his entire 1998 signing bonus, which was $3.6 million after taxes. When the story first started to break, his reaction went through the same stages as grief. At first, he stayed loyal and denied that Black could have done this. Then, when the FBI confirmed the truth, the depression and anger set in. He described his anger as, quote, a go grab a gun type of upset, end quote. For Taylor and many others, the worst part was not just the money. It was realizing that the man they considered a father figure, Pops, had been stealing from them. That is an identity level betrayal. You lose your financial foundation and your sense of who you can trust in the same moment. So, restitution. Why restitution is so hard in cases like this? Even though the court ordered $12 million in restitution, getting that money back to the athletes is a long and difficult process. In theory, victim compensation in federal cases comes through the Department of Justice's asset forfeiture program. They can use remission or restoration to move forfeited assets back to victims. In practice, a lot depends on whether there's anything left to collect. Here, Black and Franklin had mixed funds with their own accounts, used offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, and participated in a Ponzi scheme where earlier returns were paid out to newer investors' money. By the time authorities step in, much of that money is either gone, laundered, or sitting in assets that are hard to liquidate. When funds have been commingled and scattered across jurisdictions, it becomes almost impossible to make victims truly whole. So even though $12 million is written into the judgment, the real recovery for each athlete is usually far less. Tank Black's case gives us a blueprint for what can go wrong in the athlete financial ecosystem. Professional athletes are particularly vulnerable for a few reasons. There are not strong standardized requirements for who can be an advisor inside their orbit, especially beyond the basic agent certifications. Money hits quickly and in large amounts, often before the athlete has any experience in wealth management. And they are encouraged to rely on trusted insiders, family or affinity connections, rather than neutral, audited professionals. Black took all of that and turned it into a weapon. He showed how loyalty can be manipulated when there are no strong guardrails. Some of the red flags that stand out in hindsight include agents or advisors demanding full exclusive control over finances with little transparency, pressure to move quickly into deals without time or outside lawyers or accountants to review, evasive or vague answers when clients ask basic questions about where their money is or how it is being invested, and pushing non-traditional offshore or high-risk investments like car title loans or Cayman Island entities without independent verification. If any of those are present, it is a sign that more oversight is needed. From a forensic point of view, the Tank Black story checks all the boxes of a complex, calculated financial crime built on personal trust, layered corporate entities, and offshore structures. To reduce the risk of another Pops situation in sports, there are a few key recommendations that come out of this analysis. Separate the roles. Agents who negotiate contracts should not also run unregulated investment programs. If someone is giving investment advice, they need to be registered as a fiduciary, subject to audits and oversight. Require independent review. Big investments or non-traditional deals should not happen without a third-party CPA or lawyer reviewing them. That review should be hired and paid by the athlete, not the agent. Set up financial literacy and fraud training for players. Education needs to include specific examples of Ponzi schemes, self-dealing, commingling, and the signs of a predatory advisor. And improve coordination between leagues and regulators. If an agent starts acting as an unregistered broker or advisor, there should be quick communication between the NFL, NBA, Players Association, the SEC, the FINRA, so actions can be taken early. Whew. So that is the end of that one. There I am with again. That's the end of the first one. Let's jump into Peggy Fulford and wrap this up, because these are just, I feel really bad for the players because they're just trusting the wrong people. You talk a sweet game, you get them to trust you, and then I don't understand how you can sleep at night knowing you're spending other people's money, especially ones who look at you as parents. That's just another level of, I feel like I say this for every type of scam we've come across, but I just don't understand how you do that to people. Anyway, so let's talk about the second half of the Parental Hustle, Peggy Ann Fulford. And before y'all come at me and say, you only do Black people. Some people don't think that Peggy is a Black woman. She says she is, I believe. So that's why I'm covering her. Whether you personally feel like she is or not, that's up to you. But for the sake of the show and for, this episode, we're going to say that she is a Black woman. So, Pops was a type who built trust through mentorship and proximity. Peggy was the mom energy version of the same playbook. Protective, nurturing, supposedly selfless. The kind of person who makes you feel safe enough to hand over the keys to everything. And that is exactly what made her so dangerous. Peggy Ann Fulford, a self-styled financial advisor and money manager, ran a long con that targeted professional athletes for more than a decade. She operated under the name Premier Management, and her whole business model was built on this one thing: get close, get trusted, then quietly drain the accounts. Her fraud scheme ran for at least 13 years, roughly from 2001 to 2014, and it hit multiple victims in both the NFL and the NBA. We're talking about really big names like Ricky Williams, Lex Hilliard, Dennis Rodman, and Travis Best. Federal court documents said she obtained and misappropriated at least $3.5 million from athletes during the indictment period. And when sentencing came, the court ordered her to pay a total of $5,799,000 $94,870 in restitution. Whew, that's a lot of money. I had to take a deep breath to make sure I read it right because there's so many numbers. But yeah. And I want you to sit with that. Sit with what Kristen Williams, Ricky Williams' former wife, said in court when the judge asked how much Peggy stole. She said all of it. Not some, not a chunk, not a bad investment year. All of it. So this is not just a cautionary tale. This is a full demolition story. And Peggy Fulford, her story is widely told. I first heard about it on American Greed. They also covered it on what's it called? It's on BET. Trap Queens, American Gangsters Trap Queens. They covered it. Also, podcast Queen of the Con covered her. So, the story has been told a lot. So, and it's all over Facebook. I think Ricky Williams has really recently said something else about it on TikTok. So it's out there if you want to get into the depths of it. Because I'm gonna tell it, but it's so much to it that I can't tell all of it because I don't want this to be like a super long episode. But it's this one is really layered, and I feel bad for everybody. But when Kristen Williams said she took everything, she literally took everything. So the persona she sold, Peggy's whole operation. Oh, and also I couldn't find a lot about her upbringing, like her childhood and stuff. I didn't see a lot about that. So there's that. But Peggy's whole operation depended on identity fabrication. She did not just lie a little. She built a character. Like Peggy was the type of person who just lied for the sake of lying. She told victims she was Harvard educated. Not one Harvard program. She claimed Harvard Law School and Harvard Business School. Then she added extra layers to make herself sound untouchable. She claimed she had made millions on Wall Street. She told stories about buying and selling hospitals or making money through real estate ventures in the Bahamas. What she understood is that prestige is a shortcut to trust. If you say Harvard to someone who was wealthy but not trained in the financial world, that word can replace due diligence. It becomes, she must be legit. And that is exactly the trap. So this is how Peggy got people's trust. With Pops, it was, oh, I'm Pops, I'm going to take care of you. Peggy she had the no fee strategy. So here's where she got wickedly smart. She told victims she did not charge fees. She said that she was already a multimillionaire and she never requested payment because she, quote, just wanted to protect them from losing their money, which is a diabolical statement. How are you telling them that you just want to protect them from losing their money when you're the one who's taking their money? Like, that's just crazy. That is the kind of line that sounds like a blessing when you are new to wealth, overwhelmed, and trying to figure out who in your circle is real. Also, keep in mind that Peggy had been married about 4 times, and that's really where she got all of her wealth, from her husband. She always married very wealthy, and then she would divorce and keep the money or what have you. Her husbands would help her start businesses. And or she would use her husband's names, and that's how she would build credibility and all things like that. So, but in a lot of fraud cases, this is one of the biggest red flags, because free is not always free. Sometimes free is just the cover charge for giving someone full access. Her no-fee claim worked as a counterintuitive trust mechanism. It lowered defenses. It reframed the relationship as protective and personal and not transactional. Once the relationship feels personal, it becomes harder for the victim to demand receipts, just like with Tank. It becomes harder to ask for audits. It becomes harder to say, let me stop and bring in my own accountant. Because now asking questions feels like accusing someone who claims they are doing it out of love. That is affinity fraud. It is when proximity, shared identity, or that fake family bond becomes the weapon that bypasses skepticism. And Peggy didn't just have one identity, she had a whole lineup. When we look at her indictment, she used multiple aliases, including Peggy King, which is who Dennis Rodman knew her as. And she was like, I think she was Peggy King, and then the business with that was King Investments, I think. Peggy Williams, Peggy Simpson, Peggy Rivers, Peggy Barrard, Devin Cole, and Devin Barrard. And here is, jeez. I promise you, I think I did really good in the first half. I'm not saying Here is the part that tells you exactly who she is. Even after she got indicted, even after she pleaded guilty, while she was still waiting for sentencing on bond, she kept scamming. She used the name Peggy Jones and swindled a man from the New Orleans area out of $25,000, claiming he should invest in a bogus medical company in Arizona. That is not a mistake. That is not desperation. That is a pattern. And that moment, continuing to commit fraud while already facing federal sentencing is a big reason the judge later treated her like a high-risk repeat offender and hit her with the statutory maximum. Here's how she got the money. Once Peggy established the Harvard Wall Street protector persona, she moved quickly into control. She communicated with victims in person, over the phone, and through email. The goal was always the same: get them to open accounts or give her direct access to existing accounts. Her stated purpose was to manage expenses, pay bills, handle income tax payments, and make retirement investments. That is the pitch. But what the plea agreement and indictment showed is that she did not do what she promised. She just took the money. She moved it through dozens of bank accounts, and she used it to bankroll a luxury lifestyle. The indictment specified luxury cars, high-end real estate, jewelry, and expensive airline tickets. So while the athlete thought, okay, my bills are handled, my taxes are paid, my money is safe, Peggy was moving money around like it was her personal ATM. This is the money laundering layer. Peggy did not just take money and spend it directly. She layered it. She laundered the stolen capital through dozens of accounts. She moved funds back and forth between accounts to obscure the trail. And this is a classic tactic. The more you move it, the harder it is for investigators to trace it clearly from victim to thief. The federal conviction was tied to interstate movement of stolen money. In her plea, she admitted moving $200,000 from an account in Montana to an account in Texas. There were other examples of interstate activity tied to the fraud too, including buying cashier's checks using victims' funds and using Federal Express to send closing documents tied to a Houston real estate sale from Florida to Houston. So the scheme had multiple states in play, including Texas, Montana, Florida, and Louisiana. And that kind of jurisdictional layering is not random. It adds complexity, it slows investigations, it forces prosecutors to untangle activity across state lines. So here's the victim impact. Peggy's victims were high-profile athletes, and that is important because the vulnerability is not just about intelligence, it's about environment. Athletes are busy, their schedules are intense, contracts are big, pressure is constant, and for a lot of players, wealth comes fast. So Peggy targeted that. The identified victims include Dennis Rodman from the NBA, Travis Best from the NBA, Ricky Williams from the NFL, and Lex Hilliard from the NFL. At her sentencing, Rebecca Hilliard, Lex Hilliard's wife, described the financial devastation Peggy caused her family. And then there is Ricky Williams. Kristen Williams, his former wife, told the court Peggy took it all. Ricky himself had a quote, that perfectly captures how psychological this manipulation was. He said he felt like he was supposed to be angry and bitter, but he did not feel that way. He said, quote, I wanted to be on the Peggy train. I didn't realize the ticket would be so expensive, end quote. And that right there is the key to why these scams last so long. But the victim is not only losing money, they are losing a relationship they believed was real. That creates denial, rationale, hesitation to report, and a kind of emotional fog that scammers love. So I want to kind of get into exactly what she did, because I didn't really put that in here. So I'm going off of memory here. It got so bad with Dennis Rodman that there's a clip of him accepting an award. I think he's being inducted into one of the Hall of Fames. I don't remember which one, but he shows up with his kids and with Peggy. And she's walking in front of him and she has on this like really big fur and she's just all dolled up like you were thinking that she was the one getting the award. And so they call him up to the stage. He gets up there and he's just tearful. And Peggy's one of the first people that he thanks. That's how much he trusted her. But she played him so badly. She got people thinking that he just was this irresponsible person who just wasn't paying his bills when she was the one who was supposed to be paying them. It got so bad that his bills weren't being paid, his utilities were being shut off. His child support wasn't being paid, so his passport got taken. And when that happened, he couldn't go overseas to like make more money. So because he wasn't making money, he didn't have any money. And people were showing up at her place like, hey, why doesn't he have any money? And she's like, well, he doesn't have access to the accounts because he's irresponsible with the money. And there is no money, all the money's gone, or so. It was really bad. And people are trying to tell Dennis Rodman, like, hey, she's stealing from you. And he was in it so badly that he refused to believe that she was stealing from him. But again, he's like, his child support wasn't being paid, his taxes weren't being paid. It was just really bad. And then Kristen Williams, Ricky Williams' ex-wife, I believe their divorce wasn't a byproduct of the situation with Peggy, but I believe that it was a huge factor into why they got divorced. Because Kristen, again, was trying to tell Ricky, hey, I believe she's stealing from you, and he didn't want to believe it either. Same thing with Lex Hilliard. It was either Lex Hilliard or Ricky Williams. One of them, they were out shopping with their wife. So it was either Ricky and Kristen or Lex and his wife. I don't remember which one, but they were out shopping and they come outside to see their car being repossessed. And I think it was like a Range Rover or something really expensive was being repossessed. And like, what is happening? Peggy's supposed to be paying all of our bills. She wasn't paying their income taxes. I think they had this really huge income tax bill that they had to pay, because they thought that it was being covered, it was being paid, because that's what they were having Peggy, that was Peggy's job. Come to find out she wasn't paying it. So she devastated these people's lives just for her own financial gain. And then there was the question of whether or not Peggy's son knew, which was another thing, because no one knew that Peggy's son was actually Peggy's son. She made him act like that was, I believe, her brother. So everybody thought that was her brother. Come to find out that was Peggy's son. But he was never indicted. But some people feel like he knew what was going on. He claimed he did not know that she was stealing money. It's just this whole big... Peggy was she was awful. And she never admitted what she did. Crazy. Okay, so that was the synopsis of how she kind of got to everybody's money. Back to the script. So, the Louisiana side quest. Peggy didn't only target athletes. This is when she's out on bond waiting for sentencing. She also pleaded guilty in Louisiana for stealing $174,000 from a physician. The scheme involved convincing the doctor to invest in buying and redeveloping a historic vacant New Orleans schoolhouse, a property that was never actually listed for sale. So her method was flexible. She could run an athlete wealth management story, then flip it into a real estate redevelopment story, depending on the victim. That confirms she was not just a one-lane scammer, she was a professional predator. So here's a federal case timeline and charges. A federal grand jury in Houston returned an 8-count indictment against Fulford on December 13, 2016. The original charges included wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, and interstate transportation of stolen property. Wire fraud and mail fraud can carry up to 20 years each. Money laundering is also heavy. Interstate transportation of stolen property carries up to 10 years. Ultimately, Peggy pleaded guilty on February 1st, 2018 to 1 count of interstate transportation of stolen property, which capped her maximum exposure at 10 years. The investigation was conducted by the FBI. The case was prosecuted by Assistant U.S. Attorney Belinda Beck. Then sentencing came on November 7th, 2018. U.S. District Judge Keith P. Ellison imposed the statutory maximum sentence of 120 months, 10 years, and he overruled all defense objections. That sentence was followed by 3 years of supervised release. And that separate Louisiana state sentence of 3 years for the physician fraud was ordered to run concurrently. So here's why the judge maxed her out. Judges do not always hand out the maximum, so it matters why with this one. The aggravating factors were loud. The duration of the scheme, which was at least 13 years, the scale of the theft, millions of dollars, the betrayal of a deliberately created fiduciary relationship, and most importantly, her continued criminal behavior while on bond after pleading guilty. That Peggy Jones' $25,000 scam while awaiting sentencing was basically the court's proof that she was not learning a lesson. She was a risk to the public. She was likely to do it again. So the court treated her like what she was, a repeat offender with no true breaks. So here's the restitution and the reality of recovery. Peggy was ordered to pay, like I said, $5,794,870 in restitution. But restitution and recovery were not the same thing. Early in the case, a federal prosecutor indicated the proceedings had not yet yielded monetary recovery. And based on how Peggy spent the money, that makes sense. She spent most of it on things that are hard to recover in full. Airline tickets, jewelry, luxury spending, the kind of money that disappears into lifestyle. So even with the restitution order, victims often never get back what they lost. The court can state the harm, but it cannot magically recreate money that was consumed. So here is the incarceration, release, and where she is now. Peggy served her federal time at a low-security federal correctional facility in Alceve, Alabama. During the COVID era, she tried for compassionate release, citing her age, claims of needing to care for her father, and claims of rehabilitation through prison courses and working full-time in the laundry. In 2021, she also filed court papers arguing that because she pleaded guilty and accepted responsibility, which she really didn't, her sentence should have been lighter than the statutory maximum. Those attempts did not work in court. She tried it. But she was still released early by the U.S. Bureau of Prisons on April 27, 2023, and transferred to a government-administered halfway home program in Orlando, Florida. Halfway house residents generally must seek and maintain employment, and their activities are closely monitored, including cell phone use and driving privileges. Her listed release date from the halfway house program is April 24th, 2026, after which she will begin the 3 years of supervised release that the judge ordered back in 2018. Peggy's case got national attention partly because the victims were famous. Her story was featured on CNBC's American Greed, like I said, as a case study in financial predation. It also highlights a bigger industry vulnerability. Data reviewed by Ernst & Young indicated that professional athletes alleged nearly $500 million in fraud-related losses between 2004 and 2017. That number matters because it shows these stories are not one-offs. They are part of a systemic issue where rapid wealth, limited training, and trust-based hiring create the perfect environment for predators. The Peggy Fulford case exposes some very specific failure points, and the fixes are not complicated, but they do require structure. So some recommendations include mandatory third-party verification of credentials, prohibiting advisors from having unfettered access or statutory authority over primary bank accounts, mandatory financial literacy and anti-fraud training, and strict monitoring of restitution compliance during halfway house placement and supervised release. Woo! This was a long one. But considering, I was off for 2 weeks, I think it's okay. That's the end of it. We're gonna get into sip or spill though. So, sip. Some say the athletes are responsible for their own due diligence, which to an extent, yes. They say, how do you not check a Harvard degree? Wiki Williams even expressed a lingering emotional bond, saying he didn't feel bitter. Was this just a hustle that went too far? And then spill. This wasn't just a hustle. This was predatory. Peggy and Tank targeted our best and brightest when they were at their most vulnerable. They used Pops and Mama Peggy to bypass the brain and go straight to the heart. Peggy scamming someone while on federal bond proves this wasn't about necessity. It was about a pathological need to exploit. So here's the sip or spill question. Would you ever trust someone with your money simply because they felt like family, or does that now feel like the biggest red flag of all? The parental hustle works because it doesn't feel like a hustle. It feels like safety, but because without accountability, but safety without accountability is how people lose everything. Thank y'all so much for coming back this week. Again, my apologies for being off for 2 weeks. I needed it. So I don't think I'm going to read a review. I'm going to take a week off for reviews, but please head over to Apple, leave a 5-star rating and review it. If it's a negative one or something you have critiques on, please email me at blackcoffeecrimecrochet@gmail.com because it brings down, my stars, and I'm a small creator trying to get out there. So if you have critiques, just email them to me. Email them to me. Also, I'm still working on the ums and the uhs and the filler words. Keep giving me some grace. There's again. I think that is it. Follow me everywhere. Black Coffee Crime Crochet on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I do have a Patreon. I do have a Facebook discussion group. That is it, though. Until next week, I will catch y'all later. Bye.
Disclaimer. Great effort is made to ensure that all materials used in Black Coffee Crime and Crochet adhere to fair use guidelines. No copyright infringement is intended. If you are the copyright owner or represent the owner of any material used in this content and have concerns about its use, please contact me and I will promptly address the issue.